10-year-old Amaya Porter could barely keep her legs from bouncing as she sat at Gate 42C at Sacramento International Airport. Her sneakers tapped lightly against the floor while her fingers gripped a weathered book on space exploration, the very one her dad had given her when she was 5. That book had been with her through every bedtime dream, every school project, and now, her first solo trip. She had just wrapped up 2 weeks at an elite science camp in Sacramento, where she'd programmed a miniature Mars rover and learned the basics of rocket propulsion. But today wasn't just about going home. Today was special. Today was her first time flying first class. Amaya kept checking the golden boarding pass tucked into her hoodie pocket, half expecting it to vanish. Priority boarding, complimentary lounge access, extra space. She didn't know what all the perks meant, but she knew they were for people who mattered. And for once, she felt like one of them. Her father, Charles Porter, was a man of few words and steady principles. He wasn't a celebrity or a household name, but at his job, everyone called him Mr. Porter, with the kind of respect that didn't have to be loud. He worked hard and expected nothing less from Amaya. This seat wasn't just a gift, it was recognition. "I see you," he'd said when he handed her the boarding pass. "You earned this." The overhead speaker crackled. First-class passengers for Flight 672 to San Diego may now begin boarding. Amaya sprang to her feet, pulled her small backpack snug across her shoulders, and stepped toward the gate. People looked at her curiously as she walked past. A few smiled. Some looked puzzled. A little girl, traveling alone, in first class? She handed over her ticket, walked down the jet bridge, and found seat 2A. A window seat. Wide leather chair. Soft folded blanket on the armrest. It felt like luxury and safety wrapped in one. She slid into the seat, carefully placed her book in the seat pocket, and pressed her fingers into the cushioned armrests. Her heart was fluttering. Maybe this was what it felt like to make it. Maybe it was the start of something bigger. 15 minutes later, that sense of joy began to fray. Amaya was tracing imaginary constellations on the window when a flight attendant approached. The woman's smile was tight and syrupy sweet, not the kind Amaya trusted. "Hi there, sweetie," she said. "Would you mind helping us out today?" Amaya blinked. "Helping? We have a very important guest who needs a bit more space. Would you be willing to switch seats? We can find you a nice spot a little further back." The girl sat up straighter. Her voice small but steady. "I'd really like to stay here, please." The woman's smile flickered for a moment. "I know you like this seat," she said with a chuckle that wasn't funny. "But we have an older passenger, someone very important. It would really help. You're such a smart girl. You understand, right?" Amaya looked around. The other first-class passengers were all adults. All white. No one else was being asked to move. "My dad got me this seat," she said softly. "I'd like to stay." The flight attendant's eyes hardened for a second. "We'll be right back." Minutes later, she returned with a man in a gray suit and a shiny name tag. He crouched beside her. "Miss Porter," he said smoothly, "we're just asking for a little cooperation. You'll still receive first-class amenities. Just a different seat." She looked around. Passengers were watching. Some whispering. Some frowning. Her chest tightened. "My dad bought me this seat," she repeated. Her voice trembled. The woman leaned in again. "First class is usually for adults. You're a child. You'll be more comfortable back there." But Amaya had seen every row. There were no other kids. They didn't want her there. And they weren't going to stop pressing. She reached for her phone, hidden in the seat pocket. Her fingers trembled as she typed. "Amaya, Daddy, help. They want me to give up my seat. They won't leave me alone." She had sinned. Seconds felt like hours. Passengers settled. The door was still open. Her throat burned from holding back tears. Her phone buzzed. "Charles Porter, stay calm. I'm handling it. Don't move. Keep your phone close." Another buzz. "Charles Porter, do they know who you are yet?" "They're about to." She didn't understand what he meant, but she clung to the message like a lifeline. Then came a shift in the cabin. Subtle but unmistakable. The suited man looked rattled. The attendant kept glancing toward the cockpit. Another flight attendant whispered into the man's ear. His face paled. The pilot's voice wavered over the intercom. "We'll have a slight delay completing pre-flight checks." Amaya's phone buzzed again. "Charles Porter, just spoke with the COO. They know your name. And mine." The man returned, now stooped, humbled. "Miss Porter," he said, his voice quiet. "There's been a misunderstanding. Of course, you may stay in your seat. We sincerely apologize." She said nothing, just nodded. Tight. Guarded. 10 minutes later, 4 crew members quietly exited the plane. A new team replaced them. The flight resumed. But the story didn't end when Amaya landed in San Diego and ran into her father's waiting arms. It was just beginning. News broke the next morning. A passenger had posted about what they saw. Then another. Then local news. Then national. Apologies came. Policies were revised. The airline issued statements. The crew involved were dismissed. Classrooms talked about it. Churches brought it up in sermons. Parents used it as a lesson in dignity. And finally, Amaya stood in front of a camera, small but unshaken. I was taught that if you earn your seat, you don't have to move for anyone. Not because you're young. Not because you look different. Not because someone says so. If you earned it, it's yours. You stay. Her voice quivered. But her words echoed. Sometimes you don't need to raise your voice to make a difference. Sometimes, staying seated is the strongest stand of all. And the impact rippled far beyond the terminal. Amaya received hundreds of letters from other children, some who had been bullied, others who had been excluded from classrooms or sports teams. Teachers invited her to speak. Schools named essay contests after her. One STEM academy in Seattle even created the Amaya Porter Perseverance Award. But Amaya remained the same girl at heart. She still read her book on Mars missions. She still dreamed of stars. And every time she boarded a flight after that day, something changed. Flight attendants smiled a little longer. Pilots tipped their caps. And once, an airline CEO personally walked her to her seat. One crisp fall morning, Charles Porter stood with his daughter in front of a high school auditorium filled with students. As they waited backstage, he knelt and straightened the collar of her blazer. You were never small, he said. They just didn't see you clearly. But now the whole world does. Amaya took a breath, walked onto the stage, and looked out over the crowd. This time, she wasn't nervous. This time, she wasn't alone. She began, simply and calmly, like always. When someone tries to tell you that you don't belong in a space you've earned, you have a choice. You can move. Or you can sit tall, breathe deep, and remind them, not with anger, but with grace, that you do. And the auditorium rose to its feet, not in noise, but in respect. Because a 10-year-old girl had taught them something most adults spend a lifetime trying to learn, that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes, courage is quiet. Sometimes, courage is staying seated.